Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Challenger Startup Podcast. I'm joined today by Ramli John. He is a multi-author of books including Product-Led Onboarding, as well as his latest book, Eureka, How to Design B2B User Onboarding that Drives Team-Wide Outcomes. So, Ramli, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to get into this conversation about B2B SaaS onboarding.
Same here. Thank you for the invite, Justin. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, definitely. So you literally wrote the book on onboarding, super popular book on the topic, product-led onboarding. So you're the guy. Let's take it back to the basics. What does customer onboarding mean to you in 2025?
2025. Yeah, especially with the age of AI and things replacing humans for certain types of work. When you're being onboarded to an experience like a gym, I love an example where it's not software product, but like let's look at a real world example of a great onboarding experience. I can give you an example when I joined a CrossFit gym where I joined. I did a trial. There was somebody at the front who kind of walked me through, introduced me to some of the members, asked me if I've worked out CrossFit style before. And I said a little bit. And then because of that, customized experience. Here's how to do this pull-up. Here's how to do that. And then he gave me a trial of the first CrossFit workout with a group of people who were aiming for the same goals. That, to me, is what a great onboarding experience feels like. It feels like a friend going through the product, asking you specifically what your goals are, and tying back how that product can help you specifically achieve your goals in CrossFit gym world. Whether did you sign up because you wanted to get into competition? Not everybody wants to get into CrossFit competition. Some people want to join it for the community. So some people just want to feel like they're not working out alone, or some people join it because they want a challenge in life, or some people do it because they're getting old and they want to be able to carry their kids or grandkids and not feel like they're exerting themselves too much. And I think that's exactly what onboarding should feel like. Successful onboarding really is about guiding user to the value of the product and kind of helping them see how their world, their work can be transformed or changed as a result of using that product. And them seeing that and getting that aha or eureka moment is really key and important, because that's a moment where like, oh, I get it. This is why this product is valuable and will help me achieve my goals, rather than the product like kind of just showcasing everything else.
Absolutely. So a lot to unpack there. So in product terms, every user has their own use case, and the way that you communicate with them should be personalized to get them to that point of value in the most natural way possible, just like your example about the CrossFit gym. Love that. So let's take it back to the other part of your book title, product-led. So when an onboarding sequence is product-led, what does that actually mean? I know that term has become really popular and kind of thrown out a lot. So we want to clarify what exactly that really is.
Yeah, it could mean, to your point, it has become popular, and anything that becomes popular can have a lot of misconceptions. One of that misconception that people think about product-led is that it's only self-serve or it's only product driven, or traditionally people think about the old way to do it way before people can sign up for a free trial on their own is they would have a human there kind of walking them through, like let's say how enterprise companies would buy mainframe computers. You need somebody to kind of explain to you in person. You're like in there, where should we set up this computer, this mainframe? How do you have all the technical setup? And then the product-led, or even in the consumer world, they came out with products that had free trial. Think about back in the 90s with free games like Doom or whatever games that those are, or even AOL Live, where they sign up for a trial. They're not buying it up front, so they need like a cost-effective way for people to see that value, and it becomes self-serve. So back to your question, is product-led onboarding about self-serve, just a user doing it themselves through the product? I would say not necessarily. There are situations where product-led experiences does require a human. Think about complicated products where it requires multiple teams working together to really experience the product value. Like think, let's say Figma or Salesforce, where sure, you can sign up by yourself, but the true value of certain products, like even like Asana, a project management tool, is when the whole team is on that. And that often requires a buy-in. So if I had to define it, what product-led onboarding is about, product-led to me is really about driving an experience catered towards making sure that the end user is successful. And what that means is rather than catering towards the buyer, typically the exec who has the credit card, where you're trying to get them to purchase the product, by focusing on the end user success, then you can really cater this experience and kind of drive them to see the value and kind of making sure that they're successful. And that could require a human on the other end, whether somebody from your team or a third-party consultant that can help them kind of see the value of the product. So that's what I would see it. Product-led onboarding is about end-user success versus more traditional enterprise onboarding typically starts with buyer success, and then the end user success is secondary because they've already gotten paid. You've already paid the invoice, right? Right. The whole experience is catered towards you, the buyer, the exec signing on the dot, $30,000, $100,000, and then end user is secondary. Versus product led is upside down, where you need to get the end user successful so that they can sell it up to their manager or their boss to say, "Hey, I find this valuable. Can we purchase it for a team?"
Right, got it. So what a lot of people think product-led means is that there's a free trial and there's this onboarding sequence and, it's self-serve. Whereas it's a lot more nuanced than that, actually. When we talk about this focus on the buyer's success, would you say that's what sales-led means? Or I know there's different models besides mine.
Yeah, I would say that's the traditional concept of sales-led. And if we had to paint it as binary, sales-led would probably be more a top-down approach. You're selling to the buyer and kind of getting them to do a demo and getting them to purchase before experience the product. And then product-led is bottoms-up approach where you get the end user to experience the product's value. It does get messy. There are some hybrid approaches that, like let's say even Salesforce now and HubSpot, they do have that hybrid approach where they do both at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. So, in a lot of traditional B2B sales, will offer some type of a tripwire or some type of a free analysis or a strategy, or even some type of access to a community or something like that. So that, I guess, could be considered like a hybrid approach where they're keeping certain elements of product led, like using onboarding sequences and using free trials and, tripwire offers and things like this. As product marketers, of course, we want to be all about the product. We want to focus on the product and getting people to value. But would you say that there are certain cases in B2B SaaS where sales led is actually the appropriate way to go?
100%. I think that's another great misconception that product led is king. Let's make everything product led. I really like Leah Taryn. She's a product led growth consultant based out of UK. She has like certain criteria where product led might make sense and where it doesn't. One of them is if your product is easy to understand and users can see the value quickly within a day at least, then self-serve might be appropriate. But going back to mainframe computers, or let's take an extreme example, like somebody buying a private jet plane. Now, that's like top 0.1% of people who would buy a private jet plane. They would expect that catered experience, right? They would expect that experience where it feels like a VIP experience because you're selling a multi-million-dollar product to that buyer. And in that approach, the sales-led is the expected approach. And that's quite true for a certain price point or annual contract value where sales-led definitely makes sense. But there are different principles or components from product-led, especially as the buyer has bought it. How do you make the end user actually adopt the product? Because that's the back-end challenge of a sales-led company is they've purchased the product. Now we got to show them value, right? Like, how do we get their end user excited? Because now the buyer is forcing not necessarily forcing, but they're not commanding either, but they're telling their employees or their team, like, I've just bought this multi-$1,000 product, now use it. How do you get that experience great and actually adopt it? And that's where even product-led principles could apply to sales-led purchases.
That makes good sense. So you mentioned the price point is a big part of it, the complexity of the product too. And there are certain cases at, a certain price point where the client or the user is just going to expect that white glove service, and they're going to expect to be walked through it. They don't want to do it themselves. They want you to do it for them. They really want this done for them as a service. And then there are also cases where, there could be a hybrid approach. Like, for example, you could have a free trial. You could have a medium tier where it's kind of like a done with you. And then you have your enterprise tier where it's more of that white glove service. Are there any recommendations you have, or is there anyone that who's using this hybrid approach really well?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of B2B companies, especially at the scale up, they end up adopting this hybrid approach because they don't leave any kind of money on the table, because as they scale up, they want to target both the enterprise, which wants the white glove, high value experience, and they're also targeting the small and medium businesses that don't want to talk to anybody. I'm one of those people, like, I don't want to talk to sales at all to know your pricing. Like, I just want to try it out. So those small and medium businesses where it doesn't make sense, the price point doesn't make sense. Examples of companies doing really well, obviously, there's HubSpot. Slack also is a great example where they started off very product-led, but last time I heard from their S1 public filing that they have a lot of salespeople now, right? They have gotten to the point where, like, okay, we've saturated the small and medium businesses. Now, how do we grow? Let's target the enterprise company and go after a Microsoft Teams. Let's go after the big whales out there. So Slack's another great example where they've really taken that hybrid approach. And I think that's the unlock for the next level for a lot of B2B scale-up companies, is how do you kind of open up that door for both sales-led and product-led. They typically have different cultures where product-led has a very design, engineering heavy focus versus obviously sales-led. They have a very sales/marketing heavy approach. It's two different cultures, and how do you mesh them together? That is definitely a challenge with the hybrid approach, where you might have two teams kind of focus on different things based on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think Slack is a really good example. And I also, like you pointed out, that, sometimes there is a substantial sales team and then there's a product team. They have to work together oftentimes. And another example in the ed tech space of this hybrid approach is that a lot of these companies will want the end user to try it first and then kind of bubble it up to the enterprise level to get buy-in and to get this adopted across the organization. Like in the ed tech space, they'll want teachers or professors to try out the product and then bubble it up to their administrator to get it adopted at the district level or at the entire university level or something like that. So definitely opportunities to kind of leverage that hybrid approach, and a lot of companies doing it really well.
Yeah, actually, that thing you just mentioned has a term. There's actually a book called Product-Led Sales. That's what it essentially is. Like, how do you go from product-led to sales? And it does require, to your point, like certain marketing ops or data ops, because you want to know that the person who signed up is from a certain big university. I'm sure you can find that out through email. But let's say they sign up with their personal email, right? Because they don't want you to know that they work at Harvard. But you probably can find that out through some kind of third-party data connection, and that could drive that to the sales team. So that product-led sales is a whole go-to-market approach that is getting a lot of momentum and traction with a lot of B2B companies as well.
Product-led sales, definitely. That's a new one for me. I'm going to have to dig into that one. So yeah, we talked a lot about what product-led means. Now let's move it back to onboarding. So one of your takes, I know, is that onboarding doesn't actually begin after the sign up, but it starts a lot earlier. Can you explain to us what you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, people typically think as onboarding something that happens after a user has signed up for the product and they're like, now let's guide them to the product. But there's actually different stages of onboarding. One of the stages of onboarding is getting people to be onboarded to the idea that your product is good enough for it to change their life, that they actually sign up for the product. And that happens before the product, where they're looking through your materials, they've seen your ad. So the very first touch point, they're making a shift in their mind and forming an opinion about your product as to what it can do and how it can help them. That's a lot of product marketing work, positioning and messaging, because it's setting the tone and the promise of that relationship. As soon as they get into the product, I imagine it like a party where they've gotten the invite. They're expecting what kind of party is it? Is it a karaoke party? Is it a pool party? Is it a bowling party? Like what kind of party? That sets the tone as to should I wear swimming trunks or should I wear 90s clothes? So it's setting the tone for what to expect. So signing up for the product to me is like them finally getting to the house and they're trying to mesh the promise and the expectation they've set in their mind to what the party actually ends up being, what the product actually does. And if there's a conflict or there's a misalignment as to the image that they form to what they actually experience, then that's going to be really challenging for them to be successfully onboarded, because a disappointed user could be a vocal user, but they're gonna leave for good. So I think that's the reason why I make it very clear that if you're trying to improve your onboarding, you got to make sure that the marketing team and sales team are involved in that improvement process, because the messaging and the positioning and the marketing and even how the sales team pitches the product will make a big impact into setting that expectation before they even get to the product. And to me, that's why onboarding should start. It does start before the product, because they're being onboarded to the idea of your product before they get on board actually to your product.
God, that's such an important point. So you're bringing it to the content level and the marketing level and the education level. And you're saying it's all part of onboarding. It's all connected. And that's so important. Even, we're bringing it to my space, kind of the setup land before activation land, but they're really kind of one and the same. So we talk about this a lot, like, especially as the company grows, you don't want people to be in their own silo, doing their own thing and not thinking about the entire experience. So when you're educating people with your content, when you're doing your positioning on the website, when you're doing your ads and your promotions, it all needs to speak to the same thing, because you don't want to have one ads team who's doing their own thing, what they think is best, one, positioning team, one product team, a content team who's educating people on stuff, and then an onboarding person who's doing what they think is best. And it's all kind of disconnected. For example, if someone is watching an ad and then clicks through to the website and they're saying different things, the positioning is different. So you just don't want things to be in a silo, basically, is what you mean by onboarding starts way before. I love that.
Yeah, I actually call that the hidden friction of onboarding. People talk a lot about friction as being like it's hard to use, or there's too many distraction on the page, or it's hard to click this button, you can't see it. But like the hidden friction to onboarding is actually what you just mentioned, which is that misalignment around that experience. Because if the messaging and the positioning and the ads doesn't match with what's happening in the product and what's happening in the onboarding emails and what flows all the way through, first of all, the user has to think more. It's like, how does this connect to what I just remember reading in that homepage or that pricing page? And secondly, I think there's a big gap around making that experience more together and more cohesive, that it really does make the user experience feel good.
Definitely. So I think that's a good kind of starting point to think that everything needs to be aligned, especially important as companies grow and they have different teams responsible for these things. It's just so important to make sure everything is in alignment in terms of messaging. So I want to get into the nuts and bolts of onboarding itself. And I know that as a focus of onboarding, there's, a lot of, we should be focused on the aha moment, which to my understanding is we want to get the user to that first value, that most important feature for them to experience the value as much as possible, because there's a lot of things we could focus on, but we really want to narrow our focus, kind of the 80-20 when it comes to onboarding. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely true. Getting them to that first win is super critical. What great coaches or great teachers do is like they want to make sure that like within a few minutes you actually get an insight, a moment of insight or moment of win, and really get them excited for the next step in that journey.
Definitely. Do you have any good examples of that kind of aha moment in an onboarding sequence that really kind of nails it?
Yeah, I would say a really great example actually is one of the ones that I really, really enjoy is, I keep bringing this up, but a company called Miro, where they're like a collaborative tool. Obviously, I'm seeing your head nod. It's a great experience because they've really well taught this out. Shout out to Kate Shuma. She was the head of growth design there, and she's now running her newsletter, Growth Mates. But really, they've taught about how to get people to that experience. And back to that example with the party that I mentioned, or even the gym, when you sign up, they ask you what you want to do first. Do you want to brainstorm? Are you trying to create a strategy document? And based on your response, they actually show you templates. Like, oh, you're saying you want to brainstorm? Here's some templates that you can start off with, so you don't have to start off with a blank canvas. Or if you're trying to create a product strategy document, oh, here's a template to help you kind of formulate your idea. If you're in marketing and you're trying to create like your content roadmap for the next quarter, here's a template. So they're actually kind of catering specifically to what it is that user is trying to achieve their goal, and getting them to see that, oh, okay, now I can understand what this product can potentially do for me to help me be more productive or be more collaborative, so that I can invite my colleagues to help me formulate that as well. So that really is a great way to overcome a big problem with tools like Miro called the blank canvas problem or the blank page problem, where you start off with, you open up Google Docs or Microsoft Word and you're like, where do I start? I don't know where to start here. But by giving them templates, you actually are giving them a leg up to seeing the value quickly rather than getting them to start from scratch.
Definitely. So kind of just getting them to do the thing. If we can get them to do the thing, it's just way more likely that they're going to stick around. Churn is going to go way down. That's kind of the goal of it. That's the main thing. Would you agree with that?
I would say yes. I think figuring out that one thing, and I typically focus on the one thing, like what is that one beginning action that you want them to do? Whether in Miro, it's starting to create and actually invite a collaborator so you can start working on something together. For Calendly, it's booking that time for products that are more complicated, like let's say HubSpot, where HubSpot marketing has so many different things you can use it for. You can use it to schedule your socials on Twitter or in LinkedIn, or you can use it to create a landing page. I think that's where asking a few personalized questions up front, like what is your goal? What is your primary goal with using HubSpot? And kind of helping define for them what is that one thing for that specific user and guiding them there is going to be super critical.
Definitely. So the thing is different for different types of users. Different users have different use cases, and getting them to value is going to be different. Kind of like your example of the CrossFit gym, where different people are in it for different reasons. So collecting those data points up front and personalizing the experience is really, really beneficial.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I think that if people can just take away one thing from this episode, like just this one thing that can like dramatically improve your onboarding, is just that, like understanding your users, what is their goal, and then getting them there as quickly as possible, right? Rather than here's all of our buttons and features and bells and whistles, like cool, that's not very helpful. I came here to file my taxes, or I came here to create a nice invoice, or I came here to manage my projects. Whatever that thing that I came in here for, help me get there so that I can be like, okay, I get it. This is why this makes sense. This is why it's better than what I'm doing right now, or the tool or the workflow that I'm using right now, this thing is better than that because it saved me more time, saved me more money. It's more productive. It's more collaborative. Whatever that is, the promise you set up front on your homepage and your landing page or your sales pitch actually has become a reality.
Absolutely. So that makes perfect sense to me. And it's kind of like a lot of things when we're talking about product marketing is that we want to simplify it down. So we could talk about all the features, we could talk about all the bells and whistles, the technology. And I always like to use a phrase that's a Martin Scorsese quote, which is simple is hard. So it's harder to actually make it super simple than to just talk about everything and be super technical and confuse people. So that's really like where the work is making it so simple for people to understand and to get to value, something that probably onboarding can really solve for. Let's talk KPIs. Again, when we're talking to the marketing people, they're going to want to know, what am I going to measure? What should I expect as a result of this? How important is measurement to product-led onboarding? And is there anything that you would recommend tracking, any certain metrics?
First of all, defining a bunch of things is going to be critical around measurement. Measuring that one thing, defining that one thing. We've been calling it one thing. What is your activation moment is another way to put it. What is your aha moment? What is your moment of delight or whatever you want to call it? Defining the one thing is actually going to be first step to measurement because that now defines like how many of our users are getting to that place. And that's the activation rate essentially. And then how many people are dropping off? Where are they dropping off? Where it's a drop off moment essentially. And then tying it back to your business goals is like there's this really great measurement actually framework from a product-led growth guy. His name is Ben Williams in his newsletter, PLG Geek. The way he does it, and I love it, you tie those activation metrics and onboarding metrics back to the business goals. So if it's driving revenue, especially for a more product-led approach where there's a free trial or there is a freemium, how many people are ending up converting into paid, right? If it's a sales-led approach where they've already bought the product, now you're tying it back to whether that's a 90-day retention. Do the people who complete the onboarding actually stick around? And if that's the primary business goal for this, then that's it. Or is it like the 100-day retention or even shorter term, I would say a 7-day retention? Like how many people who experience the onboarding actually end up coming back later to actually see the value? So it really depends on the business goal. I would really encourage people to tie back those onboarding metrics to longer term business impact, whether that conversion, revenue, if it's like I mentioned, if you have a free trial or freemium, retention, if you have a more sales-led approach, and engagement, of course, like how many people actually continue to adopt more advanced features later down the road. So that's how we would approach it. The framework I would think about it is start off with your one thing, then tie it back to your business goals.
The one thing, I like that. I think we should call it the thing rate, right?
The one thing rate, that's OTR, that's new.
Yeah, definitely. All good metrics to measure, are we effectively getting people to value and what's the business impact of that? Good things to benchmark and measure around. A lot of people call it product qualified leads, but really that's what we want to know is, are we getting people to value and how's that affecting churn and the bottom line? I want to ask, since a lot of our viewers are kind of at the early stage, a lot of up and coming micro SaaS startups, for example. So let's say I'm a super early stage startup, like a bootstrap micro SaaS or something along those lines. And I want to take my first stab at product-led onboarding. I assume it's going to be very different from like an enterprise company that's doing this. And I just want kind of the 80-20. What's most important for me to nail with this first sequence?
One thing that I do advise any earlier stage companies or startups is to start off their onboarding, not product-led actually. I actually prefer they start off a very high-touch onboarding approach where you onboard people white glove, no matter at what price point, because at an early stage, especially pre-product market fit, the riskiest factor is not revenue. It's actually getting to something that users care about, the product market fit. Like they care about your product enough. and maximizing learning around that. So that's where I would focus on. Usually when I work with a company at earlier stage, that's where I look at, do you currently onboard your users or customers high touch? Yes. Do you have recordings? Yes, because there's so much valuable insights in that. I was asked this recently, like how would you help a company that has no data, no quantitative data. They don't have things like mixed panel or amplitude. They don't have any product data. They're not tracking it. How do you help them improve their onboarding? And I would say focus more on that qualitative data than that customer onboarding recordings, because you can mine it for information like, when does a customer start getting lost? What kind of questions do they repeatedly ask over and over again? Like, how do you do that again? Like, what does this do? Where are moments where like, oh shoot, that's amazing. Where like they actually have visceral, physical, auditory response, like a delightful aha moments. Like you can literally see them like, oh my goodness, that is cool. Like, because now you can think about, okay, first of all, where are they getting stuck? And how do I simplify that or guide them through it, make it simple, show templates or remove steps or whatever to kind of remove that confusion. And secondly, now you know where you should drive them for them to see like that physical aha moment where they actually get it. And you can also mine it for information like, how do they describe your product back to you when you're talking to them about it, and kind of like driving that as well. I would say, going back to your question, what is the 80-20? Start off there. I think start off in mining your customer onboarding calls and start thinking, first of all, where's the moments of confusion and friction? That's the first. Second, where's the moments of delight and aha? And third, how do they talk about your product? How do they describe it? What is their use case? Now you're mining like, what are the primary goals and objective? What is their one thing, right? Going back to our discussion around that. And now you have a bunch of data. You can go, okay, here are our top 3 goals that our users sign up for. Here are moments of confusion. Let's kind of describe and spend more time there. Here are the moments of delight, so we can actually drive them there as well. So that's where I would think about it and kind of start off with that foundation before I start building and designing and buying a software and getting engineering involved and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So crawl, walk, run. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of obvious now that you put it that way, that, especially if you're pre-product market fit, it's more important to learn and to be high touch and to do things manually than to start automating and bringing that automation into it, because we have to know the thing, and we don't know the thing yet if we're pre-product market fit. So really it's more about getting those learnings when you're at the super early stage, finding out what the thing is, finding out what people are confused about and what their pain points are, and then that learning kind of turns into the onboarding sequence. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, I like how you summarize that.
Cool. So we talked a lot about product-led onboarding. Let's talk about your latest book. So you have this new book, Eureka, How to Design B2B User Onboarding That Drives Team-Wide Outcomes. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the framework around that?
Yeah, that's a more focused book. It's a follow-up to product-led onboarding. And it's really focused on the B2B experience. We've been talking a lot about, more simple products like Miro and, even Calendly, especially as companies scale up their onboarding, there needs to be that messy middle. We've talked about product-led sales, but where there's a hybrid. This is all about how do you create a hybrid experience where humans are involved, if it makes sense, where, a lot of the things I didn't talk about in the first book is how educational content can also drive activation, where templates and guides and things like that can really hype. And even like what HubSpot does with HubSpot Academy, I got a chance to talk to their team about that, how they were using Academy content, like educational courses for their HubSpot marketing team, and actually using the content there to drive activation. And how do you orchestrate all of those pieces together is what this new book is about, the Eureka book. I'm excited, for that to come out in June 2025.
Definitely. So we know that it's easy for product teams to think along the lines of like what's best for the user. But when we think about B2B SaaS, we want to keep in mind that there's this bigger team involved, and that can oftentimes like take precedence, right? So how do you do that? How do you make sure that we account for that bigger team while also making the user happy?
Yeah, I would say it really does start off with that first user and kind of guiding them to that journey where they actually realize the one thing for themselves, right? And then realizing that the next step is really the whole team kind of realizing the value for their product specifically and kind of guiding them through user success so that they can become the champion to team-wide success, essentially. And I think there's this framework that I mentioned in that book called the hierarchy of friction, where people think a lot about friction as, once again, it's friction in the product where like, oh, this is too many options. Let's remove that button. Let's make it brighter. Let's make the button bigger. Whatever it is product friction. That's actually at the bottom layer of like B2B adoption. A higher level, and it shows up more in B2B, is social friction. So friction around inviting engineering to set up a code or inviting a colleague to give feedback on an idea in the product. How do you overcome that social friction? At the highest often requires overcoming the highest level of friction in B2B adoption, product adoption, is emotional friction. And that's around the fear of looking dumb, the fear of me inviting you, my colleague, and it sucks, right? That's a real fear, right? That's a real fear. Or me buying this product, inviting the whole team, and then it breaks and it doesn't do what I promised. And now my job is on the line because I promised a certain level of ROI on this product and not. People think a lot about onboarding is just about making the product easier to use so that they overcome product friction, but it often requires educational content and humans. So I call that the 3 pillars of successful B2B onboarding: the in-product guidance, the educational resources or content, and the third is human interaction, where they kind of work together depending on what kind of product or audience or segment you're serving to orchestrate an experience so that they overcome those 3 layers of friction so that they could end up becoming a successful user and then eventually overcome that social friction so that they invite their colleagues and they kind of drive a whole team-wide adoption of the product.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So in addition to just getting them to the thing, getting them to value, we have to think about all the things that can create friction and stop them from getting that value. And when it comes to B2B SaaS, especially when we're thinking about big teams, there's a lot of social friction, like you mentioned, and there's a lot of politics and things that, a lot of product people, we don't even think about, but we need to, because that can make or break your product and make or break churn at the team-wide level, right?
100%. I think that's often not talked enough about. It does show up more in consumer products where social friction and emotional friction. People think a lot about LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter as more social. I think B2B purchases are very social because you're buying products not just for yourself often, but for your team. And it's also emotional because it costs more. now, right? The bigger the cost, the bigger the skin in the game, and it does become a more emotional purchase because then if things don't work out, like I mentioned, it's your livelihood that could be on the line if it doesn't work out.
Definitely, that makes perfect sense. So, I saw you did a post a few days ago about gamifying sequences and kind of how it can be kind of akin to a video game. I remember hearing about this gamification when it comes to onboarding a few years back. ClickFunnels was like the big thing at the time, their onboarding sequence. And they had a free t-shirt and, it kind of felt like playing a video game. You got certain notifications. I personally thought it was really cool. I went through it and got the t-shirt.
Same.
And nice. I heard a lot of kind of mixed opinions about doing stuff like that, like the prizing, and was wondering what you think about that style and just, the concept of gamification in general when it comes to onboarding.
Yeah, I would say I kind of refer to, I'm not a behavioral scientist by any chance, but the experts around this say that there's 2 types of gamification or rewards. There's the extrinsic rewards, like the free t-shirt that I got, and intrinsic reward. The challenge with extrinsic rewards is that it often confuses product engagement with the drive to just get the free t-shirt. And that's what I end up doing. I just wanted my shirt. I don't really care about the product. Right? And I think that's a danger of extrinsic reward. I would say it's much better if it was variable, and that means that it was a surprise. There's this great book called Hooked by Nir Eyal. He talks a lot about that, where if it was expected and you're driving it like a carrot on a stick, do this and I'll give you a carrot, right? Then it becomes the expectation that, oh, I will only do that if I get the thing, right? And it kind of prevents them from forming a habit around that as well. A better approach is kind of driving an intrinsic award where, what is their one thing? What is their goal? What is their achievement? What is their, talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs? What is that highest level of form that they want to be good at? And what is driving them to succeed? And kind of driving them towards that, to become a master at something or expertise. So I think that's where I tend to be skeptical of offering rewards. I have seen companies like Deputy, where they're like a tool for workers, like physical workers, and they offered extra trial days if you complete certain actions in the product, in the onboarding. And I was like, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how I feel about that because now I'm trying to, if I'm not interested in the product, I'm not going to drive towards that as well. So I think I'm more towards getting them to actually understand that how this ties back to their goal. In that specific post principle, a video game principle, I really do use a ton to help improve onboarding is a principle around progressive overload. The idea that if you play any video games, Super Mario Bros. One of my favorite childhood games, where usually most video games they will start you off in easy mode. So the first level is like super easy. You have the weakest bad guys going after you, right? And they progressively make it harder. And the next level, if you're calling Super Mario, you're underground. The bad guys and the challenges are a little bit harder, and then goes to more advanced. And that's how I like to think about like B2B onboarding, because it's often very overwhelming. And I like breaking it down to smaller things. And what I mean by that is, rather than having a checklist that's like 10 items long, and because your product is very complex, that could be the case. I start off with a small checklist of about 3 items. That's like the easiest thing to do. Then once you complete that, congrats, here's the next level. And then kind of give them that next checklist. And then once you complete that, congrats, here's the most advanced, and how to become a pro, how to become a master. Here is 5 items that you can complete. So I've applied that to most of my clients that approach that principle, that checklist, and also in product tours where you give them smaller items easier up front and get them to more advanced level later.
Love that. Definitely. So now it makes really good sense. So the concept of gamification is great. Something we can definitely use in our onboarding, where, once we get them to do the thing, then there's a progressive overload. We can get them to do the harder thing and try more features and really get to be at that super user level, where, the ClickFunnels thing, it's tempting to offer a prize, but that might mess with the motivation of people, that intrinsic motivation, instead of, focusing on getting that prize. So that makes super good sense to me now. We've got to talk about AI. So with every type of product, we have an AI component now. And I think, there are great things about it, and maybe people are using it the wrong way. What are your thoughts on that? How is AI going to change onboarding?
Yeah, I would say AI has opportunities around helping kind of cater that experience. I know I've seen onboarding tools like User Pilot kind of use it to kind of generate the copy or the content around the onboarding experience, like the product tours. The greatest opportunity in my eyes is not generative AI for onboarding. It's hyper-personalization. And it's that idea that depending on the type of user you are and your goals, like first of all, we know you're one thing. But the challenge with getting people to that one thing, that aha moment, is different people have different preferences. Some people prefer a more guided tour. They want like a step-by-step. I just make it easy for me. But some people, they want that subtle touch. They want, maybe some people want that video. They want a personalized video to show how to use that. Or I hate videos. I never watch a video in onboarding, but if I see a GIF or a walkthrough, yeah, sign me up. So we have this challenge where you know the one thing, but people have different learning styles and preferences, and where I can see this taking place, where AI can actually kind of personalize the steps. You know the starting point and you know the end point. Now let AI, based on your surfing habits, what it knows about you, kind of craft the steps to that path towards there to kind of help you see that value so that it's not as much effort on our end. So right now, we'd have like me, if I was helping a company or an onboarding specialist or product specialist, they would have to design each step one at a time. And if somebody else has a preference, then you have to design another step. So now you're like, what if like there's potentially, well, it might not be infinite, but a complicated path towards that end goal. If we can just let a system or AI craft that experience, that would be cool. You know, I'm hearing that as I think that's the greatest next step, where AI can hyper personalize what you see on TV. What you might be seeing and what somebody else might be seeing could be totally different based on what you have. For me, it's actually that whole onboarding experience is specifically built by a system for you based on what you like and who you are. Would be cool.
Definitely makes good sense. So hopefully AI is able to take those data points and go through the process of learning and personalizing much better than we could before, and kind of delivering that personalized experience for the way that every user wants to be taken to value. Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you've got going on at the moment? Where can folks find out more about you and what you do and kind of take the next step with you?
Yeah, I'm excited. Like I mentioned, I'm launching my second book, Eureka, that is coming out June 24th, 2025. And I'm really excited about it. I've gotten some great feedback, and it's has a ton of workshop activities. You know, it's more collaborative for teams to kind of walk them through it. If people want to check out the first chapter of the book for free, they can check it out at eurekabook.co, and that would redirect to my main site around what I do, delightpath.com.
Awesome. All right, folks, eurekabook.co. Please go and grab your copy of Ramli's new book. Ramli, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. This has been an awesome conversation around onboarding, and look forward to chatting with you again soon in the future.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Justin.